Welcome to the Center for Israel Education's ongoing analysis of the Hamas-Israel war. I'm Ken Stein, the president of the Center for Israel Education and Emory University Emeritus Professor of Middle Eastern History, Political Science, and Israel Studies. This is our 17th webinar in the aftermath of the Hamas attack on Israel on October 7th. Hamas terrorists and other Palestinians poured across the Gaza border with Israel, killing some 1,200 people and abducting more than 230 others. All aspects of Israeli society were impacted. 350,000 Israeli reservists were called up to the regular army. 150,000 other Israelis fled their border communities from the south and from the north, fearful of a confrontation with Hezbollah in southern Lebanon. Israelis vacated those settlements running from Rosh Hanikra on the Mediterranean coast next to Lebanon, all the way across the Galilee into the Syrian-Israeli border. A word about our center. We established it in 2008 to respond to student, adult, and educator inquiries for accurate, timely, and unbiased information about modern Israel. We collect data, we provide sources, we have webinars like today. We're interested in the history of Zionism and all aspects of Israeli society. We hope you will join more than 50,000 users to the website weekly. That's israeled.org, as they explore contemporary Israel from many different vantage points. Please note that we have a special tab on the homepage that directs you to materials about the war with Hamas, and will provide you both visual and audio access to all previous webinars. We have three fine guests today, all from Israel, discussing the war's economic impact. Dr. Itai Ater of the Israeli Democracy Institute and Tel Aviv University, Talia Rafaeli of venture capital firm KOMPAS, and Danielle Abraham of the Volcani International Partnerships and ReGrow Israel. I think it would be really useful to place October 7th into a context of what occurred in Israel in the previous year.
So let me start with 3 years back. Israel was able to go out of COVID very effectively and very successfully. Talking about 2021, 2022, the economy of Israel in terms of growth, unemployment was one of the best economies going out of COVID. Unemployment was low. For the first time, perhaps ever, there was no deficit for the government. So in a sense, taxes was higher than expenses in Israel. And things looked quite good. The reason that Israel went out of COVID very effectively was mostly due to the tech industry. The tech industry is very large and very important. About half of the exports of Israel is from the tech industry. About 1 out of 8 employees are from the tech industry, and the tech industry could go out of COVID because of a global interest in certain tech products and services. And that was a really amazing period for Israel, basically till the end of 22. What happened at the end of 22 was elections in Israel taking place in November, and then a new government formed at the beginning of 2023. Since the beginning of 2023, Israel came into some sort of havoc, a turmoil, an amazing change. The government was trying to push a large, what some people call a judicial reform, and some call a judicial overhaul, changing dramatically the basic democratic institution in Israel. And since the beginning of 23, we see certain things happening in Israel. For instance, we see a global decline in terms of investment in tech. Partly it was a global decline, not related to Israel, but some other aspect is there was a decline due to the uncertainty and some risks that took place in Israel due to this dramatic change in the democratic overview or the way things have looked in Israel. This was happening in 2023 up until October. So things have not been great, but it was okay. Of course, some fiscal indicators in terms of the economy looked okay. Things have not dramatically changed, but things did not look as good as they looked at the end of 22. Just to give you one indication of that, the rating agency Moody's already in May 2023 decided to lower the forecast of Israel before the war. So there's some aspect of concern even before the war, and then came the war. That was clearly a big change, a big shock to the economy.
From late December through the outbreak of the war, how could you characterize the investment of foreigners in Israel's high-tech industry, for example?
The economy here, particularly when it came to investments in tech, it was coming out of a very challenging period of 2022. You had this market euphoria during COVID, 2020, 2021. We saw what happened with the stock market. We saw what happened with a lot of investments. You almost had this bubble scenario where 2022 basically saw a significant decline. This is across the board. This is internationally. And then the whole topic of the new government, Netanyahu's government, the judicial reform, and all of the outlooks when it came to is Israel heading towards a challenging political environment, then you had a lot of trepidation on the part of international investors. There was a lot of questions on where is the country headed. That actually scared away a number of investments. And so in general, 2023 was already a year in terms of the number of companies that managed to raise or the funds that were invested. There was a significant dip. And all of it is psychological. All of it is negative investor sentiment. And then on top of everything, October 7th, probably the last thing that the ecosystem here needed. And so in essence, what you're seeing is a year where you had very little to almost no activity when it came to the appetite of foreign investors. Companies that were just coming out of very large investment rounds back in 2021 needed to come out and raise again. And those that were caught in this cycle, which is usually a 24-month cycle when young startups need to raise money, they were basically caught in a situation where there were no investors that really wanted to bite. And so this has basically mobilized the local ecosystem to come in, and entire funds have been raised to support the local economy. The local VCs and local investors have really been pitching in to keep the ecosystem afloat. The sentiment I'm feeling for 2024, looking forward, obviously depending on how things materialize, is significantly more positive. It is back to some kind of normalization where you have companies who are successful and who are doing well, who have strong products and strong teams, are managing to raise money, just like it should be. But there's still a large percentage of foreign investors that are sitting on the fence waiting to see how things develop over the year. But I think the overall doomsday scenario that you saw in the first few weeks of the war, that seems to have dissipated.
Tell us about the role of agriculture in the Israeli economy leading up to October 7th. What role had it played? What role was it playing?
If we're talking about agriculture, we can split very easily between the agri-tech sector, which are the technology companies that you can see investment into. Food tech has boomed a lot more than agri-tech in the last few years. So there's the agri-tech sector in terms of the startup nation and startup companies and things like that. And then you've got the actual agricultural economy of the state of Israel. Israel is famous for making the desert bloom, actually creating agriculture, receiving delegations from around the world to learn from the state of Israel. We have to understand that agriculture has played a decreasing role in the GDP and the country as a whole. I don't think it's a huge part of the economy in that sense. The other thing I have to say about agriculture before October the 7th is that Israel is not food secure. We're not self-sufficient in our food. We don't have enough arable land for that. We're really dependent on a lot of imports, I think about $8.5 billion of imports of food. Having said that, if we look at the area that was terribly affected by the events on October the 7th, we're calling it now the Western Negev, the breadbasket of Israel. It wasn't really producing that much wheat, but we call it the breadbasket, which I think approximately is producing around 70% of the vegetables, 20% of the fruit, and about 6.5% of the dairy for the state. So even though Israel is not self-sufficient in food production, a significant portion of what we are consuming was coming from that region. And considering it's such a small country, any shock to that supply is quite significant and then makes us more reliant on imports, which we might not want to be doing. For example, importing tomatoes from Turkey or something. A lot of the agriculture here is highly dependent on manual labor. I think at least 10,000 foreign workers fled following October the 7th. As we know, several of them were tragically murdered. Not all of them have come back, and it's a big issue. There's a lot of effort right now to bring in foreign workers from other places. We're seeing from Malawi, we've got efforts from India. We are seeing some of the workers actually coming back that were here on October the 7th, flew out and started to come back. We've seen a huge effort in terms of volunteering from across all sectors of Israeli society and globally, which is incredibly commendable. It's quite challenging for the agricultural sector to be relying on volunteers for all kinds of reasons. if we're talking about solutions, you both have to find a serious supply of professional labor. But if we're being strategic and looking at a solution for the future, you have a huge role to play for automation across all the key value chains, such as dairy, greenhouses, even orchards, which is more challenging, and of course the packing houses.
Going back to what Talia was saying about the tech industry, we're talking about 300,000 Israelis going to reserve at some point. Now the numbers are lower. About 20% of those going to be reserve and going to Gaza and going to the army was out of the tech industry. The tech industry, the most important industry in Israel, many of them are males, young, so they are more likely to get into the reserve. And that was, of course, important and a negative impact on the ability of these firms to operate during these difficult times. Now numbers are lower and are going back into business. Still today, many people, both in the north and in the south, are not living in their homes. So they're still not working at the same pace as they used to. At some point at the beginning, also the education system was not operating. So that was also a big negative impact on the economy. Again, things have changed now. In that sense, they are much better, but that should be taken into account when we look at the beginning of the war. The construction industry in Israel, housing and so on, and tourism are, I think, the two industries impacted the most. Tourism naturally basically disappeared as many tourists don't want to come to Israel these days. Also, internal tourism is much lower, and construction, which is important in Israel, went down by about 50 to 60% because most of the construction in Israel is being done by Palestinians. Palestinians who used to come from the West Bank. For natural reasons, that has stopped after the war. I think the number is about 50 to 60% of construction sites have completely stopped. And that means that fewer housing are being built. And this has not changed yet. Unlike the reserve that are starting to go back to business or going back to tech, Palestinians workers numbers are still very low, and that's also something that we need to take into account in terms of number of construction and, of course, later prices of housing and so on.
What is the international community saying now about Israel's credit rating?
Like a few days ago, Moody's credit agency decided to downgrade the rating of Israel. And also they made a claim that they may even downgrade Israel credit rating further if we're going to see an escalation in the north with Hezbollah. That is the first time ever that Israel has faced a downgrade of its rating. Israel has been ranked by the credit agencies starting in 1988, and all since then it has been improving its rating gradually. What we see now for the first time, and also we faced several wars already, but this is the first time that one of the credit rating agencies has decided to downgrade the rating of Israel. Why did they do that? Of course, the war is a prime reason for this decision. The expenses in terms of military expenses are huge. And that's one thing. And also in terms of income, we talked about the tech, we talked about the construction. So in terms of collection of taxes, they're also down. And that means that Moody's is concerned that it's going to be difficult for the Israeli government to repay its loans in the future. I want to emphasize, even after the downgrade, we are okay. We are relatively high, but still the decision to downgrade for the first time is not a good sign for Israel. It means that if Israel will need to take debt, and it will need to take loans and debt given the expenses, the interest rate is going to be higher, and that's not a good thing that you are paying higher rates. It also means that investors will look at Israel less favorably. That also means that shekel is going to be weaker, and other implications that are not good for the Israeli regular household in terms of lower ranking of Israel. Why did it happen? Not only because of the war. The prime reason is the war, but also the concern that Moody's raised about the government and the way it handles the economy.
We came into the third quarter of 2023 with somewhat of a negative outlook, given the whole judicial upheaval. So I don't think it was a huge surprise, given the big debt burden now that the war is creating and the outlook for the economy, at least for the foreseeable couple of years. So it's not surprising. On the other hand, if you look at the Tel Aviv Stock Exchange, it's trading at 10% higher today than it did on October 6th. So I would say that there is a mixed assessment right now of the situation. There's a lot of positive outlook. I think overall, the economy is considered very stable. There's a very positive outlook on the technology sector. You are still seeing a lot of interest So yes, we have taken very, very serious hits. We have a couple of layers of challenges right now, not just the war, but also the current government. I speak on behalf of investors who live abroad. Those are our investors in our funds investing in Israel. I believe that they would love to see much more stable government come in. I think that would bring in a lot of favorable sentiments, drawing more foreign investment into the country. In terms of the entrepreneurs, the sector has taken a serious hit. As Itai was mentioning, the displacement of the workforce. There is not a single company in the country that hasn't been somehow affected by the call up of the military reserves. And yes, many of them have returned to work full time, but it currently appears that it's just a short-term period before they're deployed again in the second quarter of the year. It could be temporary, who knows? As developments happen, we'll see how that goes, but it's an extremely, extremely resilient ecosystem. You have so many startups here with teams that are abroad as well, international teams, whether in Europe, whether in the Far East, whether in the US. And you saw a lot of teams coming in and picking up the slack for whatever the Israeli teams were unable to complete. We, for example, as a fund, we have 4 companies in Israel. All of them were affected, but none of them were unable to meet their targets, which is absolutely insane if you think of the actual burden that the economy has been dealt. So tech is delivering. There's been a lot of advertisement on the hashtag Israel tech delivers no matter what, because it's true. The tech here delivers no matter what, and it is a bastion of the economy here. So we are rebounding. Again, as I mentioned, the Tel Aviv Stock Exchange is even higher than it was the day before the war started. Yes, the credit rating is a burden, but obviously we're not in normal times. If you look at the Israeli companies that are listed abroad, especially on NASDAQ, you won't see anything across the board that is a systemic effect on their stock prices or on their performance. You don't see that at all. If you see anything, it's idiosyncratic. It has nothing to do with the economy here. And all of these companies have very large teams here. There is a huge effort right now for people to go back and start new companies. There is an initiative called Next October, which has been initiated by Yizhal Shai. Yizhal Shai was the former Minister of Technology and Science. He lost his son on October 7th. He has vowed, also as a former and a current venture capitalist, that for every person who was massacred on October 7th, there will be a new company set up that will strengthen Israel's economy. That is what we truly believe is going to happen. I think the economy is going to come out of this event much stronger than it was before. The tech ecosystem is going to come out much stronger than it was before. And we're going to see a significant rise in the number of startups coming out of this ecosystem.
What are the fundamental characteristics that make the Israeli economy resilient?
It's pretty amazing to see. There is so much going on and so much sadness. Everybody's been really kind of shaken to the core. There is not one person who isn't feeling this on a daily basis. But nobody is stopping for a single second, feeling sorry for themselves or licking their wounds. It's full force ahead at all times. It needs to be business as usual because everybody understands that that is what is going to take us out of the situation. I did not grow up here. It's a resilience that I have never seen anywhere else. It's an internal strength. It's almost a commitment to succeed, no matter what the situation is. It's just part of the DNA here, and it's pretty amazing to see.
I'm less optimistic than Talia, the one who grew up in Israel, but let's see what Danielle has to say.
I was going to say what she said really resonated. Maybe Itai, because I also didn't grow up here. I have never in my life seen such resilience as I have in Israeli farmers. These are people that on October the 7th were there holding the doors to their safe rooms. Some of the leaders of the kibbutzim of the agriculture were killed or injured and lost friends and family. And within 24 to 36 hours, they were back on their farms, rounding up the cattle like Moti and Kibbutz Be'eri, who stepped up to lead from between the tanks, turning off the mains water to stop the flooding in the fields. And they're the ones that told me, we understand what Hamas came to do. They came to all the atrocities that we know, and they also came to attack the agriculture. So our victory is to go back and replant our fields. And I was standing with Moran, who is the head of agriculture of Nahal Oz. It's 700 meters to the border with Gaza. And I said to him, Moran, why is the field green? And he said, because we went out with a tank under fire and replanted our wheat. So I wanted to share that with everybody because that, to me, is the unbelievable resilience of what we've seen. Their victory is not just replanting, but to grow back stronger and to do it better. Do I see this war changing the nature of agriculture in Israel? I want to say I hope so. We think that in any catastrophe like we've seen, there's a big opportunity. I think the agricultural sector in Israel faces many challenges before October the 7th and definitely after. I think the foreign work issue and the dependence on manual labor is just one. So I think if I summarize the three key opportunities that we see, one is to make agriculture more profitable in Israel. This is about the economic resilience of agriculture. We see two key ways to do that. One is, as you said, introduce more automation with technology to reduce the dependence on foreign labor and to reduce the costs. But also in terms of diversification, can we introduce more profitable crops or different products? I mean, avocados are approximately 10 times more profitable than the field crops like potatoes. The second area where we see opportunity for big change is in environmental sustainability. Not only have our own tanks destroyed about 4,000 hectares of the soil by compacting it, which really affects its fertility, but you have a huge issue of agricultural pollution in the area. There's an opportunity for more circular economy, recycling of the waste from greenhouses, the plastic, organic waste, the waste from the dairy. And I think the third area where we see a great opportunity is actually increasing the technological aspect of agriculture as a whole. We are the agri-tech nation, and sometimes I think there's a gap between the technologies available and what we can see in the field. So how do you close that gap? How do we make sure that the agri-tech that we're so great at pushing out in the world is actually implemented in our fields also back at home? And I can tell you the farmers want it. We saw the intentionality of the Hamas attack, which was something else. And all of the irrigation controlled computers across Nachalot were destroyed. And the head of agriculture there said, I'm not going to go and buy the analog ones. No, I want to buy digital ones. And then I want to implant all of the sensors into the soil. So not only are they resilient, they see this, the farmers themselves, as a huge opportunity, and they want to see it.
We have amazing people in Israel, resilient and resourcefulness and initiative, and the level of volunteering after October 7th, it was something that one could never believe. In agriculture, in terms of helping those who've been evacuated, that was amazing. But we have a dysfunctional government. Dysfunctional government is a complement to what they do. And that's a huge problem. So having amazing people in terms of trying to go out of this crisis is unfortunately not enough in order to make the economy recover. And we see that, for instance, in terms of the budget. So currently they're trying to pass a budget in Israel due to the war, and the budget reflects the priorities of the government and how it's going to handle the economy and the situation. And there is no vision in that budget. And there is no trying to tackle seriously the problems that Israel is facing. Just another implication of the government that in order to cope with all the challenges after October 7th, we had to have a functional government. We had to have the different offices, ministries handling the situation, and they did not. That's part of the reason that the civic society came in and played such an important role, because there was no government functioning. And that's a huge concern. In terms of the people, we have amazing people, but unfortunately that may not be enough in order to recover as good as we can from the situation. So I think that's an important distinction to make between the people and the government.
I do agree with Itai, because you said to me, can we come out better? And why I often tell foreign governments when we're talking about agriculture is we can do everything on the ground, but you need the right enabling environment to make it happen. And if we don't have the right enabling environment, which has to come from the top in the government, it's going to be very difficult, no matter the quality of the people, no matter the technologies you've got. You have to have the enabling environment to make it work. So yes, we have the ideas, we have the people, we have the know-how. It's amazing. But can we actually see it implemented properly? We'll have to wait and see, I think. I hope so.
And what the three of you seem to be saying is, with the obstacles of what happened on October 7th, and with the government being, for want of a better word, dysfunctional, the economy is representative of Israelis individually involved in workarounds, initiative, innovation, not to be deterred, to succeed in spite of October 7th and to succeed in spite of the government not doing what it should be doing. That is rare, I would argue, in just about any society. At least I don't know of any other experiences that I can compare it to.
My fund, we focus on what's called hard to abate industries. These are industries that are extremely polluting. When we look at the pie of what industries have the most detrimental effects on our environment, we look at things like the energy industry, we look at construction, we look at the way we manage our cities, and we look at manufacturing industries. And that is where we invest. We invest where all the day-to-day investors normally do not. Basically, we come with a double objective. One of them obviously is a financial objective. We want to invest in great technologies. There are wonderful initiatives in Israel on, I wouldn't call them climate tech per se, but anywhere from Danielle's area of agritech to companies coming out of the universities here that are focused on what's called decarbonization, so lowering the carbon emissions in certain industries. These initiatives have existed and will continue to exist. I have not seen anything that has deterred anybody from moving forward with their projects. This is a very long-term thinking approach. Every country is going to have what's called its net zero target, so lowering the emissions and the pollution, anywhere from the water to our power plants to dependence on fossil fuels. So this is where I invest. I invest globally, specifically in Israel. I'm always looking for really unique approaches to decarbonization of heavy industry. There is a lot of effort going into this, a lot of university projects. What we're trying to do is involve a lot more international investors, which obviously the last year has not helped very much. But I'm optimistic that if we are forward-looking and forward-thinking, we will see a lot of money coming into investments in climate tech, in these hard-to-abate industries from all over the world into the opportunities here.
Do you see any indicators that those individuals who have opted out of the mainstream of the Israeli economy, do you see any changes coming there at all?
Let me talk about the two biggest minorities in Israel. I don't know if the exact word is minorities, but the Arab society, talking about 20% of the population in Israel, and they are an important part of the Israeli society. Moody's mentioned in their report that one of the problems of the Israeli economy is low participation in the workforce of minorities. And they're talking about Arabs, in particular Arab women, and about the Ultra-Orthodox Jews, where their males are not participating in the labor force. They're mentioning these are two problems of the Israeli economy. Regardless of the war, in order for the economy to go forward in terms of economics growth, we need Arab women to participate in the labor force. We need Haredi Jews to participate in the labor force. They're not. Now, that's something that needs to be changed. But the government, going back to the problem of the government that we are having, they are doing the opposite. In what sense they are doing the opposite? For instance, they are reducing dramatically the budget and the resources that are being allocated to the Arab society. They are going to decline about 15%, all the money going to allocate for infrastructure, for education, for the Arab society. So that's going back to Moody's for the problem of the Israeli society. This is in one sense not helping the Arab society to integrate into the economy. So I think this is one big important group of the Israeli society that is challenging and tackling a problem, and it's not going to be solved. Quickly about the Ultra-Orthodox, the other part that are participating in low rates in the labor force, there the government is giving a lot of money to the Ultra-Orthodox Jews these days. However, they are doing it in a way that is not inducing them to learn math and English. So in a sense, they are giving a lot of money, but this money is going to be spent in a way that is not going to give them the skills to join the labor force. So I think going back, this is a huge problem of the Israel economy in both sides, and that's the dysfunctional government that we are having is making these problems even larger. Till now, we talked about the tech and all the mainstream economy is mostly Jews and so on. But if the economy is going to recover and do it in a good way, we need to integrate also Arabs and Ultra-Orthodox Jews, and that's a big challenge to the economy. Hopefully that's going to be done better than it is being done these days.
We'll likely see in the near future, as I understand it, a very challenging security environment for Israel. That's not going to change however the war in the South unfolds. There's probably going to be higher defense spending, probably a negative impact on personal consumption, and maybe a decline on some foreign direct investment. If you were outlining what policy you would like the government to take to not have October 7th have a rash impact upon the economy, what would you like the government to do?
As a non-economist, this is not the area that I usually deal in. So I will take an easy route to answer. I think agriculture is not the key driver of the Israeli economy. That is not why we necessarily do agriculture here. However, having said that, if we want the agriculture to succeed, because we do want its contribution to elements of our food security, we do want it to serve as a bedrock to the economic communities in the Western Negev, which agriculture underlines many of them, and we want that connection to the land, I think the government has to take a decision that agriculture is important. And then it has to create a holistic policy package that actually supports agriculture. I think the last few years, we felt conflicting messages about the importance of agriculture. And if you go and ask the farmers, they're not having an easy time. So I'm not going to advocate for specific policies. And I think we shouldn't kid ourselves. It might be the key driver of the economy in Israel. But I do believe agriculture is important, and not necessarily just because of the GDP component.
I think one of the things that the government has not been focusing on is really about driving foreign money into the country, especially in times of crisis. And I say this as a result of Israel's very, very arduous and complicated tax regime. It's very difficult for foreign entities to set up permanent establishments in Israel without having very, very high taxes, whether it's not being able to get access to capital gains tax, being taxed sometimes at high income tax rate levels. And I think we've seen a big challenge. Many who have tried to come and establish entities in Israel have since left. We had periods of very strong economic progress where that wasn't as critical because you had a lot of money coming in from abroad. But now we're in a situation where you don't have a lot of foreign investments coming in. And I think that the government really needs to focus on how to make the tax regime friendlier to foreign investments into the country. I think right now the ecosystem really needs it. The economy really needs it. I'm not optimistic that this particular government will make any changes, but I am hopeful that there will be a new government at a certain point. And that is something that I would like to see. The economy rebounds much quicker if you don't have investors not coming in and not investing in the country as a result of high taxes.
In 1973, Israel went into a war, the Yom Kippur War. That was also a dramatic blow to Israel. It was very difficult for the Israeli economy to recover from that war. They called the lost decade after 1973. And the prime reason for this lost decade was the fact that after the Yom Kippur War, the security budget of Israel became huge. It was about 30% out of the government budget. That is unprecedented, 30%, because 30% to security means that you have less money for investment and for education and health and everything else. And what we see now, the Ministry of Defense and the Army are asking for a lot of money, and it feels like whatever they're asking, they are going to get. And this is a concern, in particular because the October 7th disaster was not due to not enough resources or not enough money in the army. So it's not the reason that they could not identify what happened. Nevertheless, what we are concerned is that because of the war, the budget of the security is likely to go up, but it needs to go up at a certain level that it would not be too high. And right now, the discussion about how much money is going to be funneled into the security has not enough thought about the impact on the other parts of the economy, education, health, and so on, agriculture, whatever. And this is a clear message to the government. Whatever you're going to do with the security needs to take into account the implication on other sectors in the economy.
Let's not go through another process where we have a lost 5 years or a lost decade, is essentially
Yes.
what you're arguing.